Hello, fellow mech warriors, Mage Leader here. Welcome back to the Battlemech Primer, the series where I couldn't think of a joke for this intro. We've spent a lot of time these past few months discussing the origins of the Battlemech, a story that, like Karine Jean-Pierre's voice, I'm sure most of you are tired of hearing by now. But if that's the case, then you should probably be more careful about your voting habits in both instances, because you guys have elected yet another early days Battlemech for me to cover. One whose history is so interwoven with that same old story that it's impossible to talk about it without some rehashing. So buckle up, everybody, because we're going to be breaking old ground with a mech that broke new ground. A machine so old it could be elected president by 81 million totally legitimate votes. It's the original innovator, the mech that brought Battlemech design out of the proverbial Stone Age. Today, we're taking a look at the Archer. The Archer's story begins nearly a decade before its initial introduction. In the year 2449, the Terran hegemony was in a bit of a pickle. Having recently whipped out their sizable cocks by introducing the Maquis to the inner sphere, they were now feeling a little exposed, and rightfully so. The great houses had taken the news of the new Battlemech about as well as you would expect. Despite that initial pants shitting, it didn't take long for them to realize that in order to maintain the balance of power, they would need Battlemechs of their own. Before long, every great house had its own Battlemech program, most of which were outright copies of the Maquis' design. Much like the Manhattan Project of ancient Terra, the hegemony's Krabby Patty secret formula didn't stay secret for very long. Spies ran amok in their territory, bribing, stealing, murdering, and cocksucking their way into that inner circle before returning home with the technology they so desperately sought. In that same year, the Terran hegemony would approach Earthworks Incorporated with a request. They were to innovate on the Battlemech concept and provide a machine that changed the status quo. Having recognized that the Maquis concept was no longer exclusive to them, the hegemony knew that in order to maintain their newfound dominance, they would need to do more than rest on their laurels. Earthworks began to conceptualize a new kind of Battlemech, one that would not only deliver improvements on the Battlemech's core principles, but also complement the machines that already existed. The idea for the Archer was a mech built around the role of dedicated fire support, something that could provide covering fire without exposing itself to the enemy. As such, it was designed primarily around a single weapon system with a pair of lasers as backup. The weapon that would define the Archer was the LRM, or long-range missile. LRMs have an interesting history all their own, which I will very briefly touch on. The concept of guided missiles dates all the way back to the 19th century, but the first truly practical designs were produced in the 1940s. These were standoff weapons designed to strike a distant target without the fear of immediate retaliation. The effectiveness of these early missiles is up for debate, but the concept was deemed sound enough to warrant expansion. Throughout the 20th century, guided missiles would become bigger, faster, and above all, smarter, to the point where large missiles could feasibly deliver a payload on any point on a planet. However, as the missiles grew more advanced and more expensive, so too did the systems for defeating them. Close-in weapon systems, or CWIS, was the predecessor to what we now know as AMS, and it was one of the first steps in anti-missile defense. Anti-missile missiles, such as the ancient American SM-2 and SM-6, further bolstered the ability to defeat these weapons. Nonetheless, missiles continued to improve and remained a dominant weapon throughout the 21st century. But then something changed. Humanity left Terra behind and moved out into the stars. Warfare became far larger in scope than it had ever been before, with dozens of planets being embroiled in conflict at any given time. As such, the concept of an incredibly expensive piece of ordnance that had a low chance of successfully hitting its target, as had often been the case during the Age of War, began to fall out of favor. Military commanders and designers began to seek out newer, more cost-effective ways of defeating missile defense systems, and in the end, the concept of the missile changed entirely. Rather than the high-precision supercomputers strapped to bombs that defined ancient Terran combat, modern LRMs are comparatively dumb, relying not on their guidance systems to beat defenders, but rather sheer volume of fire. Missiles today travel in swarms of cheap, dumb, but still destructive pieces of hardware, and this overwhelming tactic was what the Archer was designed around. The Archer was designed to carry two LRM-20s, one in each side torso, allowing it to fire a flight of 40 missiles at a time, which is perfect for wealthy politicians who want to demolish multiple wedding ceremonies simultaneously. These missiles are radar-guided, or Fox-1, which requires a constant target lock in order for them to track and hit a moving target. While this makes them useful at mid to extended range, they are also some of the easiest to defeat. Radar requires an unimpeded path to the target in order to gain and hold a lock, so evading LRMs is as simple as breaking line of sight. They are also limited in their tracking capability, which is a part of the reason they're fired in such obscene numbers. But that's not to say that they aren't good weapons, far from it. LRMs can be some of the most devastating things in a mech warrior's arsenal, provided he knows when and where to fire them. However, while the Archer's core concept was sound, its development was far from smooth sailing. The design would bounce back and forth between designers, government officials, manufacturers, and some random homeless man named Chuck dozens of times before the plans were finalized. It would take 9 years before Earthworks settled on a winner, and after all the cuts, edits, and other such modifications, the Archer rolled off the assembly line way behind schedule and far over budget. And that's not to say that it was a failure, however. The Archer's introduction to field operations was rocky, but successful. While mech warriors complained about its heat issues, they also began singing its praises the moment they started deleting their foes from the comfort and safety of a nearby hilltop. The Archer, among other specialized battlemechs, kicked off a new wave of competition in the Inner Sphere. These would be the Wild West days that I've alluded to previously.
No training, no understanding, Wild West pimp style.
This time period would see a rapid expansion of battlemech types. Lights, mediums, heavies, and assaults would become codified. Machines with more clearly defined roles would begin to emerge. But before all of this started, the great houses once again panicked as they had with the Mackie. The design didn't stay exclusive to Earthworks for very long. Even as they worked on improving the design, other manufacturers began producing their own copies. Before long, every great house, periphery kingdom, and candy store was producing its own variant of the Archer, and once again, the Terran hegemony would have its dominance shaken. However, while the Archer ultimately failed to secure that authoritative position as originally intended, it did make for a very capable war machine. The Archer is a rare case in the world of battlemechs. Not only has it never ceased production, but it's been in non-stop use for centuries. Most of its contemporaries are either lost to history or laughably obsolete, but the Archer's simple job of making it rain has kept it viable even up to the present day. I don't care what kind of overpowered post-jihad clan tech Mary Sue monster you're piloting, 40 missiles at once is nothing to sneeze at. Not only is it capable of bringing the pain, but it's also remarkably easy to maintain and modify given its age. While it's not intended for brawling, it has enough armor and lasers to do a respectable job in that role, and there are variants that swap the guided LRMs for dumbfired SRMs for this express purpose. It's a very basic machine, one that's easily overlooked on the battlefield due to its time in service. Many glance at it once and turn up their noses, assuming it to be just as obsolete as its early battlemech brethren, but ignore the Archer at your own peril. In battle, the Archer is what is affectionately known as a missile boat, which means that its pilot isn't a real mech warrior. Which means that its mission is incredibly simple. It stays away from the fighting and throws out damage wherever it can, helping to suppress enemy targets or draw attention away from advancing allies. The Archer works best in tandem with other mechs, particularly ones equipped with tag lasers or narc beacons, as these allow for more precise missile guidance and, by extension, more damage dealt to the enemy. It's a team player of the highest degree and vulnerable when left by itself. Even so, the Archer isn't a slouch. It's got more armor than most other missile boats, which admittedly makes it slower, but also makes it terrifying. Putting one down is not an easy task even if you close with it, as its backup arsenal of 4 medium lasers can dish out a lot of death. Despite all that protection, the Archer does have an Achilles heel. The torsos are packed to the rafters with missile ammo, and like most missile boats, that makes it something of a walking bomb. As I said, it's not easy to kill an Archer, but if you do, it'll probably be sooner and a lot more fiery than you'd expect. Like the connection between obesity and depression is a topic that missile boat mech warriors don't like to talk about, the nagging fear that gnaws at the back of their minds at every hour of the day. So while you might be tempted to hop in one and take it for a joyride, just remember the risks involved. It takes some serious balls to ride one of these into battle, and it's probably the biggest reason why someone who's piloted a missile boat for a while forgets how to fight on the front line. This has led to a prevailing idea that those who pilot them are cowards, afraid of getting into a real fight. And of course they are. You would be too if you had to carry that many explosives right next to your cockpit. So yes, while you might get pissed off at the guy hiding in the back line and throwing out missiles like a little bitch, just remember that he has your back, even if it doesn't look like it. So that's the Archer. It's the original missile boat, the Battlemech that helped establish that the Mackie wasn't just a fluke. Its clumsy older brother may have proved that Battlemechs were possible, but the Archer is the one that proved that they could be useful. It's one of the oldest Battlemechs still in service, and it's outlived many bigger, fancier, and more expensive machines. Often imitated, but never truly duplicated, the Archer stands apart not only from other Battlemechs, but other fire support platforms as being one of the best that money can buy. And for something as old and prototypical as this Battlemech was, it doesn't get any more impressive than that. Make it rain. Bring the pain. Send out the Archer. Thank you all so much for watching, and special thanks to my patrons in the Mech Warrior tier. Delphino, Miguel Batacan, Alexander Heimerl, Chef Sung, Delta 505, Military Sticks, Spacer, Arcos Raid, Kyle Vidari, Tim Cook, Tomayaga Tudor, Gary Moses Sweeney, and Admiral Chirino. I won't dwell on this long, but things have been difficult here at Mage HQ this past year, and your support has meant more to me than I can properly vocalize in our remaining time. Suffice to say that you've made a massive positive impact on my life. Your monetary contributions are immensely helpful, but even more than that, your generosity has made this jaded, cynical asshole feel something close to happiness. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and until next time, this is Mage Leader, signing off.